So I know that you all care and that we all care about our humanity. But I also know that we can be somewhat nervous about the changes that our society is undergoing. All the new robots, the AI, the avatars that may be looking after us as we age, or the robots that may be doing some of the clinical medical work. So what I'm going to try to do is show you that if we have a better understanding of neuroscience, we can actually deal with these technologies in a positive way, embrace them, while retaining our empathy, which makes us human, and even safeguarding the female orgasm. So in order to tackle this, let's start by thinking, what does it mean to be human? So some people say that we are what we do. And some people say that, well, whatever we do, it's what we move. Nothing happens without a movement. So what movement do we as humans make the most? You might think it's breathing, because we breathe about 15 times a minute. But our heart beats once a second or more. But even within that time frame, your eyes move 2 or 3 times. So, in effect, we humans, by that definition, are our eye movements. And I studied eye movements as part of my PhD at the University of Cambridge. And so what I'd like to talk to you about is, if we as humans are basically our eye movements, what are we doing with all these eye movements? Well, thanks to a Soviet scientist working in the 1960s, we know. He set up gaze tracking studies, which is where basically you look at where a human looks when you present them with a scene. And so he gave humans pictures of people to look at, and he looked where their eyes were looking. And what he found was that when we as humans look, we focus on the eye area, backwards and forwards, the eyelids, the eyebrows, the eyes. We make a few movements down to the mouth and the lips, and we do a few scanning movements around the face, but then it's back to the eyes, back to the eyes, back to the eyes. Now, what do you think happens if we ask a monkey or a dog to do that same task? Gaze tracking studies show that it's completely different. Instead of looking at the eye area, the gaze tracking shows an almost random pattern. Left, right, all around. And so it turns out that we humans are quite unique in focusing on the eye area. And why is that important? Well, we use the eye area to establish our identity, who we are, our mood, our intentions, but also our age and our health status. And it's even affected our appearance. If we go back 100,000 years to one of our ancestors, Homo heidelbergensis, and we look at that skull, it looks much more like a bear or a dog. The forehead is much more flat. But as societies became more complex and we required more advanced communication and sympathy and empathy in order to understand each other, to build these societies we have, our foreheads grew forwards, became more prominent, so that we created a visual display of the eyebrows and these muscles that act in this area. A visual artist and a neuroscientist working together have predicted that if we continue like this another 100,000 years, they think that our forehead will be even bigger, with even more display and even more complex emotions being transmitted through even finer muscle movements. Now, I don't study eye movements anymore. Now I'm a plastic surgeon, and I operate and treat the eyelid area, so what some people call the ski mask area. And I find this a fascinating place or area to work on as a surgeon, because, as I've just explained, it really gets to the bottom of what it means to be ourselves, to be humans. And what's even more exciting, which I'm now going to tell you, is that what happens here, the movements we make here in this area, also affects what we feel inside. That kind of makes me a soul surgeon, but don't let me get ahead of myself. So, in order to understand why we might have feelings from moving here, I need to explain to you how an emotional reflex arc works. We used to think that if I smiled at you, you would feel good and you'd smile back at me. But that's not actually what happens. Neuroscience has shown that what actually happens is this. I smile at you, you subconsciously mimic my smile, and then your brain feels what your muscles have done and activates the limbic center, and you feel the emotion inside. So actually, you feel what you mimic. And that means that the surgery I do can have really important consequences for people's self-esteem and what they feel inside. And I want to take you through 3 different experiments just to show the underlying science of why this works. So there's a toxin we can use called Botox, which can weaken the muscles in this area. And one large study took people, and you take half the people and you treat them with this neurotoxin to make the muscle movements weaker in this area. And the other half of the group are not treated. And then you show them emotional pictures. Maybe somebody laughing or someone crying. And then you scan, using an MRI, what's going on in their brain, called functional MRI scanning. And it turns out that the people who've had the neurotoxins, the people with less movement, when they see the picture, their brain lights up less. Whereas the people who have had no treatment, when they see the emotional picture, their brains light up more. Interestingly, this also affects our reading ability. So if we take the same group of people, the people who've had Botox or neurotoxin to this area, and the people who haven't, and we get them to read newspapers, same newspaper, they will begin to read, and they'll read at the same rate until they get to an emotional passage. When they get to an emotional passage, the people who've had the treatment to the brows or to the eye area, they will read more slowly. It takes them longer to process the emotional content. Not the unemotional content, but when they get to an emotional part, they have to slow down. Final experiment I want to tell you about is one coming out of Wales, the University of Cardiff, a few years ago. And it showed that women who had had treatment with neurotoxin, their orgasm satisfaction score, so the female orgasm satisfaction score, was much lower in the people treated with these treatments because they were not able to make the faces that created the emotions inside to enable them to orgasm. So why is this important for society? Well, it's important for me because I use neurotoxin in my practice as well as surgery. And so I have to be very careful that when I use these powerful tools, I use them in a way that is positive and that helps people with emotions and doesn't make feeling emotions more difficult. So it's a great tool. I've had it myself. So I'm not saying you shouldn't have it, but it needs to be done with care and with understanding and with the respect it deserves. Another area where these experiments can inform our society is if we look at social media and filters. So a lot of people are now using filters when they want to portray something. So they might take a selfie of themselves on a beach with a smile and then add a filter. But when you add a filter, you're actually making it less clear to the observer who you're sending it to what's happening in the eye area. And though you think you're sending a message of warmth or love, the person receiving it will not, because of the filter, feel that same emotion that you were hoping to send. And that means that we need to be very careful when we have these avatars and these filters that create the block. And I think this is the reason why we all find the modern robots that have human faces and are meant to interact with us quite eerie. They've only been developed for the last 20, 30 years. We have been evolving for 100,000 years and more. So they haven't yet been able to mimic the very fine movements that we've evolved to detect. And that's why we all find them a little bit eerie. So all this is to say that we shouldn't reject modern technology, but we should be aware of what its limitations are, and its limitations so that we continue to evolve as a species and as a society. I want to take a little step back now and just take you back to Cambridge, because I'm not from England originally. When I arrived in Cambridge, I first encountered the British stiff upper lip. Until recently, the British were quite proud of this. It was a stoic expression of having no expression in the face of any kind of challenge. And I always thought that this was a way of hiding emotions that people felt inside. But now, with our understanding of neuroscience, we can understand that actually not moving the face or minimizing the movements means that actually people feel less inside. So you're actually blocking the emotions. And this has made me realize that in armies, for example, many armies use visors which cover this part of the face, or people will grow mustaches to hide the movements of the mouth. And this is because, potentially, the emotions that people are experiencing under pressure should not be transmitted to other people. And so we've been doing this for a long time. But it can also be a helpful thing to understand this. So I want to leave you now with the final thought. There's another study showing that if you look at a mirror while you're making your positive affirmations in the morning, it can actually be more powerful. Because when you look in a mirror, you're actually seeing those eye movements as if it were another person. And the study comparing 57 people who did affirmations, positive affirmations, without a mirror, and an equal number doing it with a mirror, the people who were looking at themselves had a stronger emotional response. And so these are simple ways that we can harness the power of this neuroscience to improve our lives. So let's embrace modern technology, but treat them with the respect and understanding that they deserve, and continue so that we can evolve both personally and also as a society. Thank you.